And that was the moment that made me believe that it doesn't matter how good you are, there is always scope for improvement. There is always a reason to be curious and take new signals in and continue to evolve.
So welcome to the Who's Elvis Round Here podcast. This is the podcast where I invite leaders from all around the world to share some insights as to how we get the best out of our people. And I am delighted today to be joined with an old friend of mine, Pavi, who I've known for years. I can't remember, was it Coca-Cola where we first met, Pavi?
Yes, 2010.
Wow, 2010. And we've played together in lots of different ways. And look, Pavi's a really cool guy for lots of reasons. You're going to find out why in a second. But he's got some very strong insights into how the world ticks. So, Pavi, tell a little bit about yourself so the listeners understand who you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is indeed an honor to be here, and always great to reconnect with you. The energy that you infuse is infectious. Yeah, so I'm right now working with Chobani as their VP for Insights and Analytics, and I've worked in big, large companies. I was with SC Johnson before this. I worked with Johnson and Johnson, and I also worked with Coca-Cola. That's where spent most of my professional life, 15 years. Started out in India, lived in Southeast Asia, and then eventually in the US.
Superb. And, you are, one of the kings of insights. You're very sharp at understanding what makes people tick, which is why I'm really interested in having you on here, because obviously today it's not necessarily about brand or consumer insights. Today it's kind of insights as to leadership. So what I thought I'd start with is more of my favorite questions, which is, just tell us a story, Pavi, that you love to tell that people love to hear.
Sure. Um, so there was this time when I was with Johnson and Johnson. This is the Vision business unit, and we had a new business unit president come in. And the context here is over the last couple of years since I'd gotten there, we had painstakingly kind of done a lot of foundational work to understand the category, to understand the dynamics. Contact lenses is a very unique category because consumers have a say in terms of what contact, do they want contact lenses or not? But actually, physicians have the first say because that's how you get diagnosed. Do you need any vision correction or not? So the stakeholders or the people that you need to understand is like multiplied. It's not just consumers, you also need to understand the doctors. And so the foundational journey that we had built to kind of understand all the building blocks of what's happening was pretty intense. It took us 2 years to get there. We had identified what are our areas or gaps in our knowledge, and then made sure that we conscientiously addressed each of those gaps, and then put the beautiful tapestry of what the market was and what the future was looking like. And when this new president came in, I was very enthusiastic or eager to take him through and bring him up to speed as we were onboarding him. And I set up some time with him, took him through the entire piece. It was about an hour. And the end of the conversation, and he was very responsive through the entire uh, discussions, and he was engaged and asking the right questions. And when we wrapped up, I just asked him a simple question saying, what do you think about this and how do you feel? And he looked at me and he said, it's okay. And I literally went through a grief cycle there because I was like, really? Okay. Like, this isn't okay. This is amazing. This is outstanding what we've done here. And there was initially like there's like a resistance to that feedback, right? And you're like,
Sure.
I don't think maybe he wasn't engaged, maybe he doesn't like me, maybe he doesn't like insights. Your head spins in different ways. But then slowly I started having this grudging acceptance of, hey, wait a second. He said, okay. He did not say this is useless. That means there was something that was right. Maybe there could be some things that could be better. So I asked him, saying, why do you say this is okay? I thought this was very comprehensive. I'm very proud of the work this entire team has put together. And every time we've taken this to any of our stakeholders, we've got a lot of love for the way we put this together. And he looked at me and he said, listen, don't get me wrong. The work is outstanding. But it's okay because what you've done is it's very traditional. You've still done a lot of surveys, you've still done a lot of focus groups, you've still done, how you normally do work. And it's taken you time. And I don't even want to ask, but it must have taken you a lot of investment in terms of dollars. And that is where I feel there could be more opportunity. And I said, okay, tell me more. And he said, he calls it the digital exhaust. So he said, consumers are already sharing, they're tweeting, they're posting, they're talking about products, about their journeys, about what's going on in their lives. Have you tapped into those signals? And that's when the light bulb went on for me. And I was like, of course, why not? Why not? And then how can we do this? And so I've told this story a few times. I feel that that moment or that story really transformed my perspective towards life in general, because in the past, based on my history or my professional working, you double down on what you already know. And
Sure.
you're like, what you know is great. And we're amazing at what we do. And instead of being more open to new ideas, the more you do that and the more reinforcement you get of like, oh, you're doing good work, the more you double down on it and the less open you are to new ways. And that was the moment that made me believe that it doesn't matter how good you are, there is always scope for improvement. There is always a reason to be curious and take new signals in and continue to evolve, right? And
Yeah.
even as a person who is first generation, born and brought up in India and moved to the US, in my mid 30s, uh, it was everything over here was new, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
whether you drive on, which side of the road you drive on, how you turn the switch on or off, everything sometimes is actually inverted. So then I started relating to my personal story as well to say, hey, if I came into the US and always did things the way I've done, I wouldn't even exist because, first of all, I'll have an accident driving on the road
Yeah.
because I'll be on the wrong side of the road. Second, I wouldn't have lights on in my house, so on and so forth. So, so I feel like I now call this power of and. So instead of like or, which is whatever I've done is great, or nothing else is good, it's whatever I'm doing is great, but it can be even better. Why not, embrace and absorb what else is being thrown at you and continue to evolve and become better?
Yeah, I love that, Pavi, because the more senior we become and the more successful we become, the easier it is for us to just fall back on our past behaviors, our habits, our routines, but also the identity that's been created. I'm that person that did that well, and therefore
Yes.
you get locked into this way of being very easily, and it's part of our natural programming because obviously we want to survive. As gatherer hunters, if we do what we've always done, chances are we will keep surviving. And actually, we just get better at doing it in that way. So, learning how to spot the signals that maybe it's time to shake things up. I mean, it's easy when you go and live abroad; you don't have much choice. But when we're in work, how we can do that on a daily basis is the key, right? And then with that different attitude and perspective, we can shake some things up. Now, do you, obviously you embrace this. Since I've known you, you've been doing creativity and innovation. Um, and by the way, a part of knowing how to do this, by the way, I think is doing what you did with that leader, which is when they give you feedback, number one, you didn't react and just take it negatively. You actually became conscious and went, hold on, I've noticed I've had a feeling around this, around my work. That's curious. That's surprising. I'm going to ask some questions about it. And you dug underneath it and you went, as an insight professional, that's kind of what you do anyway, but you dug underneath it to understand why, right? So one of the things we can learn to do is actually not take the work so personally that it attacks our identity, but say, hey, it's just about the work. How can I learn from this by asking better questions? So that's one thing that you did beautifully in that. Have you got any other strategies for making sure that you are constantly evolving and learning and doing things in new and different ways?
Yeah, I think, again, this is like you talked about the evolutionary biology, and as from hunters and gatherers, our the entire context changed as humanity continued to do better. I think if you look at it, evolutionary biology, the brain uses 80% of our energy. So there was also, we are wired to not use that much energy on the brain because you didn't know when you're going to get your next meal.
Sure.
So I think you need to hack it. You need to hack that piece of like just falling in a rhythm and a routine. And self-awareness is a good way to hack it, right? It's like, why am I not being curious? Can actually make you curious because nothing is stopping you from being curious because you were the most curious person when you were a kid. Every kid is the most curious person. It's as you grow into an adult, you stop that curiosity because some in some ways the world conspires against your curiosity, right? And then you allow yourself to fall in that trap as well. So I think that's the piece is like always stay open, ask more questions, challenge the status quo, not for the sake of challenging it, but for the sake of understanding better.
Yeah, and so often I see people who just let it go by. In their head, they're going, "I don't get this," or "Is there another way?" But actually, it's just easier not to mention it, right? It's easier not to ask the question. But through years of doing insight work and digging deeper, it's become, I guess, it's more of a muscle reflex to go, actually, I don't understand this. Help me get this. And you dig and you dig and you dig until you get it. So this whole kind of self-awareness thing is key to it. Understanding, is this something I could just do in a routine? Because some things we can and they're great. Or is this actually worth going the extra mile and shaking things up? And in which case, I'm going to get curious on it. I love that. Now, look, so Pavi, if there's one thing that you think releases the genius of your people, your teams, your organization, more than anything else, what would be that thing?
Yeah, so we already almost answered that question. It's curiosity. And right. And so our job, especially my job working in the insights analytics space, is yes, the job could be defined as there was a particular business problem. You needed to get some answers, whether it's talking to consumers or looking at the data better. And you came back and delivered the answers, which give you enough reason to believe you've answered the question. The question now is your job done because you answered the question? Or actually, is your job starting now?
Yeah.
Because you answered the question, because answering the question is not enough. What's the action that is going to be taken is what's actually going to drive the outcomes. So the mindset shift that needs to happen is yes, we need to find the answers, and that's what our job is. But we cannot rest after we found the answer. Actually, we need to fuel ourselves and charge ourselves to have the further questions of like, how are we going to use this information? What's the so what and what's the now what of this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've worked on so many big insight programs over the years. Not as many as you, but I've done my fair few. And what used to be the way, certainly 20 years ago, is the insight group used to come up with the great insights and then they'd hand them over to somebody, and then their job was to do something with it. And invariably, there was a drop off somewhere between the handover in the touch and the feel of the insight and actually the passion and the energy of that team in transferring it over. But it's changed a great deal now, whereas now it's less of a kind of relay race and it's more of a partnership all the way through the process. And I guess that must feel very different to you, Pavi.
Yes, yes, it does. It does. And again, I call it almost and you and I have worked in these kind of sessions, so I'm sure you'll be able to relate to it quickly. I call it how do you have people to experience the insight? Right? So
Yeah,
that creates the curiosity and the empathy, a mix of both. And that will lead to some action because if you experience what or you have a closer view on understanding why the consumer is behaving the way they are behaving, you're going to be that much keener on let me address that pain point better, right? So
yeah,
if it's just a statistic, if it's just a number, if it's just an aha, if it's a you know understanding of their psychology of why they're doing it, it plays a role. But the moment it comes to life, whether it is in a video form, whether it's a quote from the consumer, or actually seeing the consumer in their context, which again takes a lot more to engineer. But if we can orchestrate those moments, that's when I have seen the best outcomes happen. Because
Yeah.
then once you've seen it, you cannot unsee that. Once you've
Yeah.
understood the pain of what the consumer is going through, then any business leader, you cannot forget about it. And then that becomes, that North Star of what you want to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is that balance. And actually, I've heard you use this language already today, which is the balance of think and feel. Yes, we need the logic and the rationale. We definitely need that. But actually, we need to engage all our senses in the feeling bit, because the feeling helps us navigate innovation projects, and it helps us, understand where we should put our attention. But it also gives us the energy and the passion. I came across some research recently, which I loved, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but those people who actually see the impact of their work on consumers, or shall we call them people, are 3 times more passionate than those that don't. The ones that are removed from that impact, which is a huge statistic, but it makes perfect sense. Unless you see how you're impacting lives, you're never going to have the energy that you should have. And therefore, the way you bring to life insights is all about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
very much. That's a good statistic. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. I'll
Yeah.
find the reference for you, Pavi. It was a very cool
Yes.
piece. So look, we both work in business, and with lots of big businesses. I've got a personal bugbear, which is, and I know you've heard me talk about it, which is we're just not designed for business, and we're designed to be gatherer hunters. And business has got some weird things going on. There are lots of stuff that goes on in businesses that actually, if we had a blank sheet of paper and we designed from scratch, we would design it very, very differently. So I've got loads of bugbears and I rant about them constantly. I'm wondering, any bugbears that you've got about how business is run now, and any ideas on what we could do differently around that particular issue?
Yeah, I think one piece that especially in today's context and age of where AI is, and I feel like when you come up with a solution, there are more people who are looking to figure out, like people are very literal, right? In the business world, they're very literal. If someone comes to you and talks about, hey, here is how you can use this solution, they want to they're not allowing their imagination to run wider to say, how does this solution apply to my business context? They believe that the same solution is a lift and shift and just needs to be applied to our business reality. And typically, more often than not, they're not able to see that happen, right? Because it's
Yeah,
like, oh, here is an example. We did this in this company. And the first thing that goes in their head is like, oh, our company is different and our
yeah,
category is different. And so this isn't going to work. And this is where I've always have had conversations with people I've worked with and my teams and stakeholders to say, don't think about immediately applying it the way it is. Think about the philosophy of what is solving
yeah,
and then see whether that can be reapplied to our reality or not. So instead of finding reasons why the solution cannot be lifted and shifted by itself, find out ways in which you can make it work as long as you believe that the solution has some merit and value. So there is
yeah.
this concept they call as I learned this at Kellogg when I did a program there. They call it affordance, and they use an example of the duct tape. So the duct
Oh,
tape
yeah.
was invented to actually repair HVAC ducts. If you had a
Mm.
leak in the duct, it was cheaper to just put a tape on it than to replace the duct by itself. That's why
Sure.
it was invented. And it's called the duct tape for that reason, not the brand name. However, I don't know about you, but if you come and ask me, that's probably the last thing I would be when I bought the duct
I've
tape. That's
never
probably
used
the
it for
last
that.
thing. Exactly. So that is the affordance, right? Which is almost like off-label usage of that product is far beyond what it was initially designed for. I don't know the people who invented it. Did they even imagine that it can be used in so many ways or not? But surely they hit on something, and then the users who were buying saw multiple applications and uses of it. So, how do we bring that kind of a principle into the structured environment in the business world today? Because not everything, the way you see it, can be applied the way it is. and how do you have a little bit more open mind and imagination of what can be, as long as there is some value from that solution.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's two things going on there. There's one which is kind of negating this immediate knee-jerk reaction, which is we're different. It won't work here. The number of briefs that I have where clients say, you really need to understand our culture because it's so different. It's so different. And actually, you dig underneath it, everyone's people, right? We've got the same stuff going on. There's nothing that different going on. There's a bit of context, bit of language, but basically it's the same kind of stuff. But we think that, and we've got this kind of thing about specialness and things don't fit, and it's a very negative way of protecting change in some ways. But then beyond that, then what we have to do is when we look at the world and we get stimulus in, is to look at the principle, right? It's not there's no one solution out there waiting for you that's perfect right now. There's a principle underneath it, and we need to be more creative in how we apply it.
Yeah.
But that needs a certain openness and positivity, right? And that needs some good creative behavior. So that makes a difference in any organization. Anyone listening, if you get onto that, there is no holding you back. And talking of things that won't hold you back, my final question for you, Pavi, and I'm interested in your response to this because you always seem a very positive person to me, which is why we get on. What gives you hope, Pavi?
So I think if I look at the next generation, it gives me hope. And I know a lot of people, and just a few days back, my wife was showing me some memes on the Gen Z because we have Gen Zers at home as well. And so it's easy, right? It's easy to look at the next generation and feel there is despair. But then at the same time, if you open your mind and look at the next generation, there is so much hope. There's so much positivity. There's so much creativity, even though a lot of the ways things are being done are being disrupted, they still are finding a better way. So even in the business world, when I look at, when we have interns who come in or
Yeah.
people who are very new to the workforce and they come in, there's this concept of almost which is called as reverse mentoring, right? So imagine if somebody is coming in, they know how to play with Gen AI far better than at least I know how to play with it in terms of taking the full benefit out of it. Because I've never written an essay or done my homework using ChatGPT as an example, but that's what they've
Yeah.
done. And so they've figured it out and hacked it better. And so, yeah, there's no point resisting the change. The question
Yeah.
is, how do you embrace it and leverage it to kind of augment you to do even better? So that's what gives me hope is the next generation as they come in. I actually feel, I think they're calling the after Gen Alpha, they're planning to call it Beta. I
Yeah.
feel it should be called Gen AI. That's what the
Yeah.
next generation is. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think different generations are very good inspiration for each other, and sometimes the olders back to the youngers, and vice versa. But actually, if you want to get a different perspective, that's a great thing to plug into. And I love personally working with interns, the graduates who have just come in because there is a freshness about them, which is amazing because they can see things we will never see. They have skills that we don't have, and the more we can mix that up, the better everyone becomes, right? Because it's the diversity of approaches that make a better culture. So I love that for hope, Pavi. I knew you'd have a good one. Look, it's been an absolute joy talking to you. Hey, so what's exciting coming up in your life over the next few months, Pavi? Any things of note that you've got loads of energy for?
Yeah, so I'm helping. This is an industry effort. It's called the Insights Lighthouse, and essentially, someone in Europe. This is her name is Dr. Lubov. I look up to her. She had the vision of understanding that from a insights analytics space, and there wasn't that much engagement in industry forums in terms of, especially on the client side, people were not really engaging in those forums, even though those forums have so much value. And
Mm,
so what I really liked about what she's done here is she said, instead of me complaining about it, let me do something about that.
that's
And
refreshing.
yes, and what she did was she said, listen, let's set this up. If we are not being invited to the right tables, let's set up the table and have the conversation with the right people. So she established Insights Lighthouse as an umbrella, almost an informal gathering of people, insights, thought leaders. and said, let me take this umbrella to forums where usually insights people are not even like invited or not even an afterthought. So, as an example, World Economic Forum at Davos or the Cannes Lions Festival of Marketing. And
Sure.
so, what she did was, every conversation there talks about insights, it talks about the consumers, but the insights people who are doing a lot of the work are hidden in the shadows. So, the
Yeah.
question was, how do you make sure that they are there? And so she set this up and suddenly got great engagement from the CEOs, from the CMOs. And now she was, I was talking to her recently, and she's bringing this to life at Vegas at CES, which is in the US, one of the most amazing forums talking about
Very
technology,
cool.
entertainment. And so we're setting up an Insights Lighthouse, literally a lighthouse, within CES. And that's giving me a lot of energy because I think how cool it would be to have insights leaders also participate and engage in what's happening in the technology space and entertainment space and have their voice come in to infuse because insights can make what other things are make that better, and then we can get better ourselves by looking at what's happening outside our world.
I totally agree. Well, if anyone's listening there at CES, look up Pavi. He's great company, and I'm sure he will share some of that energy with you. Look, I personally, I love the Insight community. I've done lots and lots of work with them over the years, largely because I think it is a fundamental human skill, being able to see things in more interesting ways and find the value. And that unlocks, obviously, creativity and lots of value. And obviously, some people are lucky enough they do that for a living. The rest of us are learning from you. So, Pavi, it's been fantastic having you on. I'm looking forward to the next time we meet in person. But you shared some wonderful, wonderful stories and, of course, some killer insights. Go well on the next adventure.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was really an honor. Thank you.